I've always believed that the downfall of something doesn't come crashing down in one moment. It starts with a small crack. A shift so subtle you almost convince yourself it didn't happen. But that night, standing under the low amber lights of a downtown hotel ballroom, the sound of clinking glasses and practiced laughter filling the air, I saw that first crack. Rachel and I had just arrived at her company's annual winter mixer, the kind of event that tried too hard to feel like a celebration but never quite escaped the stench of performance. I'd been to a few before, enough to know the cadence. People pretending to like each other, coworkers dressed like it mattered more than it did, managers trying to loosen up while keeping one eye on who was watching. It was the same show every year. She looked stunning. That's the part that hit first. Rachel always knew how to dress for the occasion, but that night she went all in. Black dress, off the shoulder, heels that gave her that slow, gliding walk. Her hair was pulled back in a way that framed her face perfectly, and the lipstick, deep, bold red, was a shade I hadn't seen her wear before. I told her she looked amazing, and she smiled. Not her usual Rachel smile, but the kind she gave in photos, perfect, posed, distant. As we stepped inside, she let go of my hand. It wasn't abrupt, not rough, just purposeful, like she needed both arms to breathe in the moment fully. I didn't think much of it then. I looked around the room, the usual upscale hotel conference ballroom turned cocktail hall. Chandeliers dimmed to a flattering hue, jazz trio in the corner, bartenders already moving in rehearsed rhythm behind a sleek white bar. Then she stopped, just for a second. I followed her gaze across the room, and that's when I saw it. A man was standing near the far end of the room, sipping a whiskey, half listening to a woman next to him, but his eyes were locked on Rachel. And Rachel was looking right back. The world didn't stop. People were still talking. The jazz trio was still playing. But everything else in my peripheral faded. It wasn't just a glance. It was the kind of eye contact people make when they've shared something they weren't supposed to. That quiet exchange that doesn't belong in public. That look that carries history or worse, anticipation. Couldn't have lasted more than 2 seconds, but in those 2 seconds, my stomach flipped. I'd never seen Rachel look at someone like that before. Not even me. Then, like a switch had been flipped, she turned to me with a bright smile and said, "Come on, you haven't met my team yet, have you?" She slipped her hand into the crook of my arm, pulling me away from the entrance like nothing had happened. And maybe nothing had. Maybe I'd imagined it, misread it, invented a story in my head because the night was already making me feel like an outsider. Her world and mine didn't overlap much anymore. It wasn't always like that. But lately, her job felt like its own separate life. New people, new projects, late nights, conferences, excuses. I brushed it off and followed her, shaking off the strange feeling like it was just nerves or the early hit of the whiskey I'd barely touched. She introduced me to a blur of names. Some I vaguely remembered from last year, others completely new. Everyone was dressed like they'd been coached by a stylist. Voices filled with that artificial energy people wear in corporate spaces. I nodded, smiled, laughed when expected. But in the back of my mind, that moment played again. And again. The way he looked at her. The way she looked back. Eventually, I excused myself to grab a drink from the bar. I figured I needed something stronger than sparkling water to drown out the static buzzing in my head. Rachel stayed back with her group, already deep into a story about some brand campaign that apparently shook up the client space. I didn't care. I pretended I did. That was part of being supportive, right? At the bar, I stood behind 2 people ordering espresso martinis, and that's when I saw him again. The man from earlier. He was closer now, talking to someone else. Smiling. At ease. He looked like he belonged in this world. Like the job, the suit, the charm, the smile. All of it came naturally. There was something too smooth about him, like a sales pitch in human form. I found myself watching him longer than I should have. Trying to place him. Had she mentioned him before? I didn't recognize him, and that somehow made it worse. The bartender handed me my drink, and I took it with a nod, turning my back on the guy and walking toward a tall table near the side of the room. From that vantage point, I could see Rachel again. She was laughing now, genuinely. I could always tell the difference. Her whole face moved when she really laughed. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, her nose scrunched a little. That's how I knew it was real. But as I watched, I saw her glance across the room again, right back to him. I froze, my drink halfway to my lips. It wasn't a coincidence. Not the way her eyes darted and then shifted away quickly, like someone trying to check a mirror without being obvious. She was scanning for him, looking for him, and he was gone. I stayed at that table for a while, pretending to be interested in the decor. Everything in that room suddenly felt louder, artificial, like the walls were closing in. Rachel eventually walked over, brushing a hand across my arm as she smiled. "Everything okay?" I nodded too quickly. She tilted her head. "You're quiet. Just people watching." She laughed. "You always do that." And just like that, the subject changed. She steered the conversation back to something safe, something surface level. We chatted about her colleague's presentation, the food, the lighting. She didn't bring up the guy, and neither did I. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe it was everything. But something had shifted. I didn't say anything else that night. I played the role of the supportive husband. I smiled, toasted, mingled, asked polite questions about people's kids and weekend plans. I posed for pictures and laughed when Rachel slipped her arm around my waist for a group selfie. But deep down, I knew something had started. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I had just witnessed the beginning of something I didn't yet understand, but would soon have no choice but to. The ride home that night was quiet. Rachel rested her head against the car window, watching the city lights smear past in streaks of gold and red. I kept my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road, pretending to be tired, but I wasn't. My brain wouldn't stop buzzing. I should have said something. About the look. About the guy. About the way she kept scanning the room for him like her heart was on some radar I didn't have access to. But I didn't. I kept it inside the way I always did. Because starting that conversation felt like tearing open a seam I wasn't ready to look inside. And if I was wrong, if it really was nothing, then what did that say about me? Instead, I let the silence stretch between us like fog, too heavy to cut through. Rachel didn't break it. She just smiled faintly when we pulled into the driveway, mumbled something about being exhausted, and headed straight upstairs. I sat in the car for a minute longer, just breathing, just staring at the dashboard. And that's when it started, the backward spiral. The mental replay of every moment over the past few months that hadn't made sense. At first, they were little things. Her sudden obsession with privacy. Rachel used to be the kind of person who'd toss her phone on the couch or leave it charging in the kitchen overnight. Lately, it was always in her hand, or face down on the counter when I walked into the room. Notifications silenced. Screen dimmed. If I asked who she was texting, she'd smile and say, "Just work." Sometimes she'd even laugh like the question itself was ridiculous. Then there were the late nights. First, I believed her. When she said the campaign deadline had moved up. When she said the new director was a nightmare and everyone had to stay late. When she came home past 10 with takeout and tired eyes and said, "You don't know how lucky you are not to work in marketing." But over time, it stopped adding up. Once, she came home late wearing different lipstick than she'd left with. Another time, I noticed her perfume had faded and then been reapplied, like she'd freshened up in the car before coming in. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was being paranoid. Because that's what she told me. "You've got to stop reading into everything," she said one night after I asked why she hadn't answered her phone for 2 hours. "It's exhausting, John." And maybe she was right. Maybe I was exhausting. But somewhere deep inside, I felt something changing. Not just in her, but in me. The way I looked at her. The way I second-guessed myself around her. Like I had to be careful not to step on some invisible line I didn't even know existed. I remember the first time I actually considered the word affair. I was sitting at the kitchen table alone, eating leftover pasta while she was working late again. I'd scrolled through social media, paused on a photo she'd been tagged in by someone from her office. It was nothing incriminating. Just a group *T at a bar, everyone smiling, drinks in hand. But I noticed the same guy from the holiday mixer, standing beside her, too close, his hand hovering a little too low behind her back. Rachel wasn't even looking at the camera. She was laughing at something he'd said, her face turned toward him, like he was the only one in the room. I zoomed in. Then I closed the app and pushed my plate away. That night, I barely slept. I kept telling myself it wasn't what it looked like. People stand close in group photos all the time. Offices drink together after long days. It's normal. It's fine. But I wasn't fine. I was unraveling in silence. There were other moments, too. Moments that didn't mean much on their own but added up to something when strung together. Like the time I reached for her phone to check the time, and she yanked it away before I could touch the screen. "Sorry, I've got client stuff on there," she said quickly. Too quickly. Or the way she suddenly had a lock screen password she never used to care about. When I asked why, she said, "It's just good practice. Work wants us to be more careful." Even the way she started taking calls outside, on the patio, in the car. She said it was because our place echoed too much on speaker, but I couldn't help but notice that the calls always ended the moment I stepped outside. I wasn't stupid. I noticed patterns. I just didn't want to believe what they meant. One evening, while folding laundry, I found a receipt in her coat pocket from a restaurant I didn't recognize. Place downtown. Classy. Expensive. Place we'd never been together. The date on it? The same night she told me she was working late and ordered in with her team. I stared at the receipt for 10 minutes before sliding it into my wallet. I didn't confront her, not because I was afraid of her answer, but because I already knew it wouldn't be the truth. She had a way of making me question myself, of spinning things so cleanly that I ended up apologizing for even asking. "I hate that you don't trust me," she once said, after I asked who had texted her at 11:30 p.m. Her voice had cracked like she was genuinely hurt. "That's not the marriage I want. Neither was this." But I didn't say that. I just told her I was sorry. Again. I think I apologized more in the last 3 months than I had in our entire relationship. Eventually, the doubts started leaking into other parts of my life. I'd space out at work, skip lunches, come home early just to see if she was really where she said she'd be. I'd find myself scrolling through her social media, trying to decode captions and tags, looking for clues and smiles and timestamps. What kind of person does that? Paranoid one, a jealous one, a man losing his grip. But here's the thing, you don't become paranoid for no reason. You become paranoid when your gut keeps ringing an alarm that your brain is too scared to acknowledge. The worst part was how lonely it felt. I couldn't talk to anyone. Not really. I tried bringing it up to my brother once in the vaguest terms. "You ever get the feeling something's off in your relationship?" He shrugged. "That's just marriage, man. Comes and goes." But this didn't feel like something that would go. This felt like a fracture. And deep down, I knew something was bleeding through it. I remember standing in our bedroom one night, watching her sleep. She looked peaceful, beautiful even, but it hit me in that moment how much distance existed between us now. Physical closeness didn't mean emotional closeness anymore. Her body was beside me, but her mind was somewhere else, with someone else. The realization made me sick. I stepped out onto the patio, barefoot and cold, and just stood there staring at the night sky. My hands were shaking, but I wasn't cold. I was unraveling. And yet, I said nothing. I let the days stretch on. I buried the suspicions under routine. Work, chores, dinners, laughter when I could fake it, silence when I couldn't. But I knew. I didn't have proof, not yet. But I had memories, moments, shifts, patterns. And now, after what I saw at the mixer, I could no longer explain it away. That lingering glance, that knowing look, that wasn't nothing. That was the beginning of something real, something I couldn't unsee. And whatever it was only getting harder to ignore. There's a difference between suspecting something and knowing it. Suspicion creeps in slowly. It makes you question yourself. You second-guess every thought, every observation. Corrodes from the inside out, making you feel like you're losing your mind. But knowing, truly knowing, is different. It's sharp. It's clear. It lands like a blade and leaves no room for doubt. For weeks after the company party, I tried to hold onto the belief that maybe I was wrong. Maybe I'd read too much into that look, that moment. But doubt was no longer a slow leak in the back of my mind. It was everywhere, constant, pressing, loud. I woke up with it, fell asleep with it, carried it into every corner of my day like a shadow I couldn't shake. It was the following Thursday that everything finally snapped into focus. Rachel had another event, a follow-up mixer for the executive team and department leads. She mentioned it over coffee, casually, like she was reading off her to-do list. "It's nothing big," she said, stirring almond milk into her mug. "More of a networking thing. Just a chance to connect across teams before Q1 kicks off." She didn't invite me. She used to invite me to everything, even the boring stuff. She'd ask me to tag along, play the role of supportive spouse, smile and nod through PowerPoint recaps over finger food. But not anymore. "Where's it at?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. She didn't look up. "Downtown. That rooftop place with the fire pits. You know the one." I nodded. I knew it. We'd gone there for our 3rd anniversary. "What time?" She shrugged. "Starts around 6. I'll probably be home late. You don't have to wait up." I just nodded again. Said nothing. I didn't trust myself to speak. That night I waited. Not out of jealousy. Not out of paranoia. But because I couldn't pretend anymore. Around 9:15, I got in my car and drove downtown. The streets were busy, but the bar she mentioned was easy to spot from a block away. Lit from the inside out, fire pits casting flickering shadows onto the sidewalk. I parked across the street and sat there for a moment, engine off, lights out. I didn't know what I expected to find. I wasn't planning to make a scene. I just needed to see something real, something undeniable, something that would stop the questions cold. After a minute, I stepped out of the car and crossed the street, sticking to the edge of the sidewalk. The building had floor-to-ceiling glass along the ground floor and an open rooftop above. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I just stood beneath the corner of the rooftop patio, tucked in the shadows, and waited. It wasn't long before I saw her. Rachel, laughing, twirling her wine glass in one hand, the other resting lightly on the railing as she leaned in toward a man I instantly recognized. The same man from the mixer. The one who had looked at her like they shared a secret. Now I knew why. They stood too close. Close enough that it was unmistakable. Not friends. Not colleagues. Not just two people sharing space at a company event. They had their own orbit. Their own atmosphere. The conversation between them seemed quieter. Like the rest of the world had been tuned out. He reached for her waist. And she didn't pull away. She didn't flinch. She didn't shift. She didn't look uncomfortable or surprised. If anything, she looked like she expected it. My chest tightened. Not in the sudden, panicked way it does when you're scared, but in the slow, sinking way that comes when you finally, fully understand something you've been trying not to see. I didn't move. I just stood there, staring up at my wife as she let another man touch her in a way that used to belong to me. It wasn't S***Zool. Not overtly. It wasn't public enough to make anyone gasp or take a photo. But it was int**mate in a way that said more than a kiss ever could. It was the familiarity, the ease, the comfort. She smiled at something he whispered, and in that moment, the last shred of denial I'd been clinging to slipped away. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't a theory. This was the truth. Rachel was involved with him. Whoever he was. I didn't need to know how long. I didn't need a timeline. I didn't need to check her messages or search her receipts. I had just seen it, and that made it real. I turned and walked back to my car, hands in my jacket pockets, moving on instinct more than thought. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. I didn't feel sadness either. What I felt was something heavier. Numbness. Emptiness. Like someone had scooped out my insides and left a hollow echo in their place. Inside the car, I sat for a long time, staring at the steering wheel. This was it. All the late nights, the quiet phone calls, the vague explanations, the coldness in her touch. It all made sense now. It wasn't in my head. It wasn't jealousy. It wasn't insecurity. It was real. Rachel was cheating on me. I whispered it to myself, just to hear it out loud, just to see if it sounded as absurd as it felt. Rachel is cheating on me. It didn't sound absurd. It sounded like a sentence I'd been avoiding for months. I don't remember driving home. I just remember sitting on the edge of our bed later that night, staring at the framed photo on her dresser. Us on a beach in North Carolina 2 summers ago. Her smile in that photo used to bring me peace. Now it felt like a mask. She came home after midnight, quietly, like a thief. I heard the door open, the shuffle of her heels being kicked off. A long pause in the hallway. She didn't expect me to be awake. I didn't move. I stayed in the dark. She stepped into the bedroom, startled to see me sitting there. "Oh," she said, voice soft. "You scared me. I thought you'd be asleep." I looked up at her. Her hair was tousled from the wind, makeup smudged slightly at the edges. She smelled like wine and expensive perfume. "How was the event?" I asked. My voice was steady. Too steady. She blinked, then smiled that practice smile. "Fine. A little dull. You know how those things are." I nodded. "Who was the guy you were talking to?" I asked casually, like I was asking about the weather. She froze for a split second. It was small, almost unnoticeable. But it was there. A beat too long. "Oh, just Brian. He's in product strategy. You'd like him." I didn't reply. She crossed her arms, shifting her weight. "You okay?" she asked. I stared at her. For a moment, I didn't recognize her. This woman standing in front of me, spinning stories, lying with a straight face, hiding entire parts of her life from me. "I'm fine," I lied. She leaned down to kiss my cheek, but I turned slightly, pretending to reach for something on the nightstand. She paused, then straightened up, saying, "I'm exhausted. I'll shower in the morning." She disappeared into the bathroom. The door closed, water ran, and I sat there listening to the sound of it, wondering how many more lies she'd tell before the truth finally caught up to her. I knew now, and that changed everything. The days that followed were strange. Not dramatic, not explosive, just strange. Rachel carried on like nothing had happened, like the night of the mixer, and the man she'd let place his hand on her waist had never existed. She smiled when she got home, kissed my cheek in passing, left me notes on the fridge again like we were still in some sitcom marriage where everything was fine. But under all of it, something had broken, and she didn't know I'd already seen the pieces. I watched her more closely now, not in the way I had before with quiet paranoia. This time I was detached, almost clinical. I wasn't searching for proof anymore. I already had it. I was studying her, trying to understand how someone could look you in the eye while actively betraying you. How she could still say "love you" as she walked out the door, knowing exactly what she was going back to. Her affair had a name now. Brian. I didn't know much about him aside from what I'd seen and heard in passing. Tall, confident, the kind of guy who wore too much cologne and used hand gestures to make himself seem more interesting. There was an arrogance to him, the way he walked, the way people glanced toward him when he entered a room. He was the kind of man who assumed everyone was paying attention. Rachel was, and apparently so was everyone else. The whispers started small. At first, it was just a change in the way Rachel's coworkers looked at me when I showed up to the building for a charity event she'd asked me to attend. Smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. One guy shook my hand like he was offering condolences. I caught a glance exchanged between 2 women when Rachel introduced me. Eyes wide, one eyebrow raised, followed by the kind of smirk people try to hide behind a wine glass. Something was off. People knew. It hadn't stayed private, not like she thought. Rachel wasn't just lying to me. She was lying to herself. And the illusion of control she thought she had? It was already slipping. The next confrontation didn't come from her. Came from him, Brian. It was the annual Q1 kickoff meeting. A big, overblown event Rachel's company threw every year. Team-building speeches, marketing plans, open bar, forced mingling. I'd never planned on going, but she asked me to come. Practically insisted. "People are bringing spouses," she said. It's more casual this year. Not like before. I think she wanted to keep up the illusion. Wanted to play the part of the loyal wife with her smiling husband by her side. Like that could cancel out the rest of it. I agreed. Not because I wanted to go, but because I wanted to look him in the eye. The man who'd been helping himself to my marriage. The event was held at a fancy hotel downtown. Same sort of vibe as the Winter Mixer, but louder, less refined. Someone in leadership must have decided young and modern meant neon lights and a DJ. Everyone was drinking. Everyone was pretending to enjoy themselves. I played along. Rachel introduced me to people like she always did, her hand firm around mine. Her laugh just a touch too loud. I watched her eyes constantly scan the room, and I knew who she was looking for. Eventually, he found us. Brian. He walked up like he belonged there, confident, smirking, like the center of some universe I wasn't invited into. He wore that smug kind of smile that said he wasn't worried, that whatever this was, he'd already won. John, he said, extending a hand. I've heard a lot about you. I took it. Firm grip. No smile. Can't say the same. Rachel's hand on my arm tightened slightly. Brian's on our strategy team, she said quickly, voice too sweet. He helped with the Soul project last quarter. He nodded, looking directly at me. I like to think I help with a lot more than that. I stared at him. The silence between us stretched just long enough for it to become noticeable. Rachel let out an awkward laugh, tried to pivot the conversation. But Brian wasn't done. Rachel's lucky, he added, sipping his drink. Not many women have husbands who are so trusting. It was casual. It was subtle. But it was a sh*T. My jaw clenched, but I didn't take the bait, not yet. Rachel's eyes flashed. Okay, let's go say hi to. But Brian wasn't finished. You know, he continued. His voice just loud enough for nearby conversations to quiet. I've always admired how composed you are, John. I mean, most men wouldn't be so calm, especially when everyone else seems to know what's going on. The air shifted. People nearby turned. Some tried to pretend they weren't listening. Others leaned in. Rachel looked like someone had just ripped the floor out from under her. Brian, she hissed. That's enough. I set my drink down slowly. My heart was racing, but not with panic. I was calm, clear. This man had just thrown down the gauntlet in front of an audience. He wanted a reaction. He wanted to humiliate me, publicly, and I could see it in his eyes. He thought I wouldn't do a thing. He thought I was soft. He thought I was weak. He didn't know me at all. I stepped forward, just enough to close the distance. Do you always run your mouth this much? I asked quietly. Or just when you're trying to cover up for being a coward? His smirk faltered. Just a flicker. Rachel stepped between us, whispering something under her breath, but neither of us moved. His eyes locked on mine. He was trying to decide what to do. Bluff? Laugh? Escalate? He chose poorly. He put a hand on my chest and shoved. It wasn't a hard push. More symbolic than anything. But it was enough. Enough to make it clear he didn't think I'd do a thing. Enough to prove how badly he'd misread the situation. I didn't raise my voice. Didn't posture. I simply stepped in, shifted my weight, and used his own momentum against him. In seconds, he was on the ground, flat on his back, staring up at the ceiling. His drink had spilled, the glass spinning away toward someone's feet. There was an audible gasp from the crowd. He tried to sit up. I crouched beside him before he could. Let me make this clear, I said, low and even. You can mess around in secret. You can lie. You can even convince yourself that you're the one in control. But the second you bring it out into the open, into my face, you lose whatever power you think you have. He didn't respond. His face was red, eyes flickering with shock and humiliation. Rachel was frozen, staring, mouth slightly open. I stood, straightened my jacket, and turned to her. I'm going home, I said calmly. You coming? She didn't move, didn't say a word, didn't even try to explain. I walked out. No one stopped me. The music had faded. The fake laughter was gone. In its place was something heavier. The tension of a room that had just watched something true shatter through the facade. Brian didn't get up. Not right away. He lay there in the middle of it all, surrounded by his own arrogance, and now his failure. And for the first time in a long time, I felt something new. I felt seen. By the time I reached the parking garage, my hands had stopped shaking. That surprised me. I thought I'd feel more rage, more fear, more guilt. But all I felt was a strange, sharp clarity. The kind that only shows up when something you've been afraid to confront finally cracks open in front of everyone. I sat in the driver's seat with the door still open, the cold air creeping in around me, and just breathed. Not because I was trying to calm down, but because I could. For the first time in months, I could finally breathe. I expected my phone to light up. A text from Rachel. A missed call. Maybe a message from one of her coworkers or even HR. God knows corporate loves protocol. But it didn't. The silence stretched. It wasn't until I pulled out of the garage that I saw the first call come through. Her name lit up on the dashboard. Rachel. I let it ring. I wasn't ready. Not for whatever spin she'd try to put on it. Not for the apologies she hadn't offered when I gave her the chance. If there were words left to be said, they'd have to wait. At home, the house was dark, quiet. Still the same space we'd built together, but now it felt like neutral ground, somewhere in between what we had and whatever came next. I poured a glass of water, sat down at the kitchen table, and stared at the front door like she might walk through it at any second. She didn't. Instead, I stayed up until past 2 a.m., replaying the confrontation over and over in my head. Not because I doubted myself, but because I was stunned by how easily it all unfolded. Brian wasn't supposed to go down that quickly. Not the way he carried himself. Not the way everyone talked about him at her office. But maybe that was the point. Guys like him rely on reputation. They build an image so carefully, they start to believe it themselves. And when someone doesn't flinch, doesn't blink, that image shatters. I learned something that night. Power shifts the moment you stop pretending someone else has it. The next morning, Rachel still wasn't home. Her car wasn't in the driveway. Her side of the bed was untouched. I assumed she'd stayed with a friend, or maybe even with him, though the thought barely stung anymore. Whatever she was doing, it was her mess to sit in now. Around 9:30, my phone finally lit up with a text. Rachel, I'm sorry. I don't even know what to say. I need time to figure this out. Please don't shut me out. I stared at the message for a long time before locking the screen. Later that afternoon, I got a call from a blocked number. Against my better judgment, I answered. John. The voice was unfamiliar, calm, professional. This is Evelyn Simmons. I'm head of HR at Rachel's company. I was hoping you had a few minutes to talk. I stepped outside and shut the door behind me. Apparently, the confrontation had sparked more than just awkward conversations around the office. What happened last night, she said, wasn't isolated. I stood on the porch, heart still, listening. Brian had a history. Nothing formally reported, but plenty whispered. Close contact with subordinates. Inappropriate messages. Alcohol-fueled flirtations at company events. He had a way of pushing boundaries and walking away clean. Until now. Multiple employees have come forward today, she explained. Your presence last night, what you did, somehow opened a door they didn't feel they could open before. I thought you deserved to know. I didn't say much, just nodded, said thank you, and hung up. I leaned against the porch railing, eyes scanning the street, trying to process what I just heard. Brian wasn't just a threat to my marriage, he was a threat, period. A predator hiding behind a polished smile and a well-ironed suit. And Rachel, whether she'd realized it or not, had fallen right into his orbit. I thought this was just a betrayal of me. But it was bigger. This was about manipulation. About power. About someone who thought he could touch what wasn't his and walk away without consequence. That night, Rachel finally came home. I heard her key in the lock, slow and hesitant, like she was testing the air before she entered. When she stepped inside, she looked different. Not disheveled, not distraught, just smaller, deflated. "Hi," she said, voice almost inaudible. I nodded but didn't get up from the couch. She stood in the entryway for a while, clutching her bag like a shield. "I didn't stay with him," she added quickly. "In case you're wondering." I didn't respond. I wasn't sure it mattered anymore. She stepped further in, dropped her purse on the table, and sat across from me, like a job interview she hadn't prepared for. "I don't even know where to start," she whispered. I let the silence sit. She broke first. "I didn't plan for this. I didn't go looking for Brian. It just happened. We started talking after meetings. Then it was drinks after hours. Then he started texting me and saying things you haven't said in years." I flinched at that, just slightly. Rachel caught it. "I'm not blaming you," she said quickly. "I'm not. But things between us, they haven't been right for a while." I wanted to scream, not because she was wrong, but because she was only just realizing it now, after everything. "We could have worked on that," I said quietly. "Together, like adults. But you didn't come to me. You went to him." She looked down. "I know." The silence stretched again. "I don't know if it meant anything to him," she added. "Maybe it did. Maybe it didn't. But I know it meant something to me. It made me feel seen. And I was desperate to feel that again." The word hit me like a gut punch. Seen. That's what this had always been about. Not lust. Not even love. Just validation. The kind she didn't think I could give anymore. I stood and walked to the kitchen, needing space to breathe. She followed me slowly. "What happens now?" I stared out the window. The backyard looked the same as it always had. Quiet, unremarkable, safe. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "I want to fix this," she said. "If there's still a chance to." I turned to face her. "You had a chance. You had dozens. And you used every one of them to lie." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't flinch. "You humiliated me," I continued. "In front of strangers. In front of your coworkers. In front of the man who thought he could take what wasn't his." She swallowed hard, nodding. "I know I don't deserve forgiveness," she whispered. "But I want to try. I want to earn it. Somehow." I didn't answer, because forgiveness doesn't live in promises. It lives in actions. And I didn't know yet if either of us were strong enough to get there. What I did know was this. I had faced the man who thought he could take my life from me and walked away with more than I came in with. I had my dignity. I had the truth. And for the first time in a long time, I had control.